Shalom, this is Daniel Stern, and today I want to talk once again about the changes in the Middle East. Last episode I told you that we would talk about that for much further explanation about the big picture about Netanyahu's plan for the Middle East. Check out our March 5th episode. But seriously, wild things are happening. Before we get into it, I want to say that Donald Trump recently said that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for the Abraham Accords and that more countries will join. Jordan is the first country that we're going to look at, just outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. Founded in Egypt in 1928, the Islamic, as an alternative to autocratic regimes of an Islamic-based rule, Hamas is an offshoot of it, and it is active throughout the Middle East and the Maghreb, and certainly the Arab Spring was one of its highlights. The Muslim Brotherhood was very active during the supposed Arab Spring of 2011 and onward, where many of the old regimes which had dictators leading a secular government were toppled by Islamic forces. That's just a brief summary of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Interior Minister of Jordan closed their headquarters in Amman, took their weapons, confiscated their property. Basically, they were accused that they planned to harm security forces and sensitive sites. A week earlier, a wave of arrests accused people of creating missiles and drone infrastructures in cooperation with Lebanese. Now, the question is, how will that affect Jordan, as within their parliament, 32 seats, 20% support the Muslim Brotherhood. So we'll see what happens. On a side note, the Muslim Brotherhood are also outlawed in Egypt and in the UAE. So many of our Middle Eastern neighbors are not fans of them. Moving on to Syria. Congressman Corey Mills of the United States met with al-Jolani, the president of Syria, and he indicated that al-Jolani told him that he wanted to work with Israel, to have a strong relationship with Israel, to be a good neighbor. He even went so far as to pass along a message to President Trump that he wants to join the Abraham Accords. Moving on to Lebanon. According to Saudi news, an understanding has been reached between Palestinian organizations in the Lebanese refugee camps and the Lebanese government that they, the Palestinians, would give up and hand over their weapons to the Lebanese authorities. Now, during that exact same time, Naim Qassem, the head of the Hezbollah, let's say the current head, the others were eliminated, has said that the organization will not surrender its weapons. And in response, the president of Lebanon, Joseph Aoun, says he doesn't want war with Israel, and the army is the only one who will have weapons. Now, also, the Lebanese army claims to have stopped and arrested people who launched missiles towards Israel. And we'll get back to the Lebanese army in a moment. But in this time in Lebanon, the IDF continues to attack and strike at the terror infrastructure of Hezbollah. For example, a Lebanese money and weapons smuggler, their chief money and weapons smuggler, was killed. And this caused Parliament member Nazia Mata to criticize the Hezbollah's decision not to disarm because it allows Israel the excuse or justification to continue its airstrikes in Lebanon, which are not pleasant for the civilians. But in going back to the army itself, a recent report states that the Lebanese army is running very low on funds and that they don't need supersonic fighters and long-range artillery and radars. What they need is salaries, gasoline, water, bullets, and clothing, which so far are being supplied by different localities and civilians. So this is something that will need to be dealt with for the Lebanese government to continue operating. Moving onward, There was a recent leak that a U.S. Saudi deal for $100 billion of weapons will be announced when President Trump visits Riyadh in the coming weeks. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is just that you can see what's going on and what changes are happening in regards to these countries' position towards Islamic terrorism, towards the organizations that are opposed to Israel, as well as just how their alliances with Western countries and their stance towards Iran change over time. And one of the biggest of those, in my opinion, or at least for me, is that on the Holocaust Memorial Day, as I mentioned in the last video, the United Arab Emirates Embassy in Tel Aviv released an announcement where it expressed sadness over the Holocaust and will not forget the horrors of the past and will work towards a better future. Now remember, this is an Islamic country that until recently was clearly opposed to the existence of Israel. Anyways, moving on. CENTCOM, the Central Command of the United States Army, basically the part of the Army responsible for the Middle East. 2 E-3 Sentry planes landed in the area, and their role is command and control during complicated airstrikes covering hundreds of kilometers. C-17 heavy transports. Just in the past 2 weeks, over 25 of them arrived at the Nevatim Air Base. And they are the ones that bring the Patriot and THAAD missile defense systems, which of course are instrumental in stopping any Iranian threat or counterattacks to Israel after strikes on Iran. So if this is all a giant bluff, it's certainly a very, very expensive one. Additionally, Major General Shlomi Binder, head of military intelligence and the vice head of the National Security Council, flew to Washington to meet their counterparts. And back to CENTCOM, General Kurilla, its commander, arrived on Thursday for a visit in Israel, meeting with his counterparts in preparation for a possible Iran strike and for the defense after a strike. Time will tell. Moving on to Iran itself. Marco Rubio clarifies that Witkoff's remarks about Iran enriching uranium to 3.67% is that they can import uranium from other countries for civilian use and not enrich it themselves. Yesterday's negotiations in Oman seemed to be much harsher than the previous week, including the Iranian missile program into the negotiations, which eluded it in the previous deal. Moving on to Yemen, the Houthis rumored to be recruiting. Who are they recruiting, you ask? Well, it seemed that they're recruiting Somalian, Eritrean, Djibouti, and Ethiopians, by some due to the horrible financial situation in those countries, and some through coercion and force. And if you want to look at the spot between Iran and Yemen, then we can talk about the mysterious blast in the southern port of Iran in a chemical plant, which killed over 20 and injured over 800. This port is used as a part of the journey between Iran and Yemen, the Houthis, and between Iran and Hezbollah. So this mysterious blast, which Israel does not take credit for, is very interesting in that regard. But let's expand a little farther than usual into Africa. More than 200 Christians were killed on Palm Sunday in Nigeria. 70 Christians were killed in the Congo. There is the world is ignoring the atrocities done by Muslims towards Christians all over the world, and it is unacceptable. So you today need to take a moment and pray for Christian brothers and sisters around the world that are being slaughtered by the religion of peace, Islam. In Africa, a report just came out by a Turkish blogger about a secret war between the Mossad and the Hezbollah that has been going on for years. it seems that about 30 to 40% of the Hezbollah's funds come from drug running using South American cartels and using the diamond smuggling routes in Morocco, Nigeria, Kenya, Cameroon, and more countries, and that the Mossad is doing its best to eliminate key figures in this shadow war that is part of the economic war against Hezbollah. Now, just recently, if we're jumping farther out to the United States, right-wing Minister of Internal Security or National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, visited President Trump in Mar-a-Lago and spoke at Yale as well, and had other important meetings. And I just want to point this out because it's quite the contrast from half a year ago during the Biden administration, when this same Itamar Ben-Gvir was a persona non grata. He was unwelcome and considered illegitimate by the administration. So, it's just interesting to see how things change with just the flip of a switch. So thank goodness that the Biden administration, Harris administration, Obama administration are no longer with us at this time. And just to point that out even more, congratulations to Ambassador Mike Huckabee, who was officially nominated a while back and arrived in Israel a few days ago and is a great friend of Israel. In one of the recent photos, it showed him standing next to his wife. She was wearing a necklace with a Jewish star. Her handbag itself was an Israeli flag. I don't know him personally, but I know he's very close to the evangelical messianic movement in Israel. And you know what? That's not even important, but his political opinions are. And just recently, one of the WHO officials, the World Health Organization officials, told Mike Huckabee, now that you're coming to Israel, you should put pressure on Israel to let in humanitarian aid. And you know what Mike's answer was? Ambassador Huckabee's? His answer was that the pressure needs to be put where it really belongs, on Hamas, to release the hostages. So that's your difference between the current and the previous administration. Moving a little bit farther out again, Paraguay recognized Hezbollah and Hamas as terrorist organizations. Just like in Europe, there are countries that are hoping to recognize the Palestine as a country, an imaginary made-up country for an imaginary made-up people. So likewise, it's important when countries like Paraguay now recognize Hezbollah and Hamas for what they are, or when countries move their embassy to Jerusalem. Likewise, it's important when countries recognize Israel as the owners of this land, which we are, since it was given to us by God, and even if you are an atheist, since the Jewish people have been here for 4,000 years. Now, again, we've spoken in the past about UNRWA and the fact that Israel passed a law to curtail their activities in Israel, but we're still treading water in this. So unlike Israel, which is so worried about it, by the way, the Muslim Brotherhood, which we spoke about earlier, operates in Israel, but anyways, and is illegal in Jordan and Egypt and so on. But so the U.S. Justice Ministry just announced that UNRWA was wrongfully created by the UN General Assembly, and as such will no longer receive immunity as the rest of the UN receives. So that's the difference between proper, swift acting and backpedaling. Speaking of backpedaling, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is backpedaling regarding the arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. A higher level court accepted the appeal and sent it back down for review. So I guess Trump's sanctions on the court worked. And let's come back around to our neck of the woods. Abu Mazen, the Palestinian Authority president, says that his day after plan, as compared to the IDF and Netanyahu and Donald Trump and so on, his day after plan, he envisions that of the 2.3 million Gazans, a number which itself is not confirmed, 70% would return to Israel, where they left in 1948. Now, this is, of course, a place that I remind you that nowhere else in the world do refugees inherit their status as refugees. And if you and your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather have lived somewhere else, then you no longer have refugee status. But anyways, let's continue. And this, of course, is an irrelevant idea because it's 100% non-negotiable that the right of return will be given to Palestinian refugees in any constellation of peace treaty. I can't believe even the Israeli far left would give them that. But, you know, it's a good thing that Abu Mazen is about as relevant to the world as a VHS machine. Moving on to Gaza. A month ago, 15 people were killed, some of them medical staff. And the New York Times let out a scathing article about it. And when I spoke about this a couple episodes ago, I told you, let's wait and see what the IDF said before we lay blame. So here is what the IDF has reported about this event. The event started at 4 in the morning. An ambulance was stopped and 2 people were killed. One Hamas operative was arrested. So within the ambulance, there was at least 1 Hamas operative that was arrested, and 2 people, who I honestly don't know because I didn't look deep enough into it, were killed if they were Hamas as well. But at the very least, a Hamas operative was in the ambulance. Now, more ambulances drove by, and none of them were stopped or shot at. A fisherman and his son were stopped and released. So this was an IDF ambush. They were looking for someone, they were looking for something, they were looking for hostile activity. At 5:04, a row of vehicles drove right at the unit, and the IDF commander assumed they were under attack and ordered fire and to advance on the vehicles. In the New York Times footage, you can hear the ceasefire order, Chadal Esh, given as soon as the IDF realized that they are not under attack. Also, the claim that the bodies were tied up before being shot is, of course, false. Then at 5:16, UNRWA forces showed up, possibly to provide aid for this convoy. UNRWA is, of course, in cahoots with the Hamas, and shots were fired at them to keep them away, and one of their workers was killed. According to the IDF, 15 died, of whom 6 were terrorists. Now, if we take that at face value, then of the 15 who died, 6 being terrorists means that the whole group is contaminated, despite the fact that 9 were not terrorists. Now, the bodies were buried to keep them from being eaten by wild animals, and were collected a week later. To me, I don't know about that. That sounds a bit far-fetched, but I like to believe my government and my army, but it does sound a bit far-fetched, but they were collected a week later. It is well known that Hamas uses ambulances to transport its fighters and arms, which is, of course, against all international laws and lawfare and so on and so forth, laws of war, not lawfare. So this is, of course, a very unfortunate event and a tragedy, but one can only blame, well, not one can only, but one should blame Hamas for its rampant use of ambulances. As we see, 6 of the 15 killed were Hamas fighters. And like in cases of friendly fire, which are a tragedy, it is a part of war. The second in command of the Golani Brigade was terminated, and the commander faced disciplinary action. Not because of the fact that this was an illegal action, but because they made a mistake. Continuing in Gaza, there are reports of food shortages. The international food organizations have said that as a result of the blockades and sieges, they've run out of food. But in fact, it seems that local merchants, which are generally operated by Hamas or pay them a hefty sum, are stockpiling and selling their food in small amounts because the price increases dramatically. Yesterday it was reported that the IDF has created a new safe zone in Tent City, in between the Morag corridor and the Rafah corridor. That in order to enter it, there will be security checks, and then aid will be provided. A mechanism has come into fruition. It will be provided by American organizations. The idea is to separate between the terrorists and the unarmed civilians, and to have an external mechanism be the one that provides the aid. French Foreign Ministry announced that 115 Gazans left and are currently in France. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. In the last few weeks, 36,000 Gazans immigrated to Jordan, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates. And I recently saw a report that over the past 18 months, about 300,000 Gazans are no longer in the Gaza Strip. Many due to immigration, of course. Some casualties of this war. But things are changing. Now, moving on to what the Hamas wants in negotiation deals. We're almost at the end, ladies and gentlemen, so bear with me. Hamas still wants a full deal. Recent reports, as of yesterday, say that they want a 6-month ceasefire for all the hostages, and during those 6 months, negotiations will be made for the rest. That's one report. Second report, 3 Hamas leaders informed Egypt that they are willing to negotiate handing over their weapons and to be exiled, including Mohammed Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, their dead leader's brother. And Mohammed Sinwar is currently their chief leader. But at the same time, very well-known senior Hamas leader Osama Hamdan says Hamas will no longer respond to any negotiation offers that don't include a full end to the war, and also that they will not disarm. So we have multiple reports that each counter each other, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But clearly what is needed is more military pressure on the Hamas, because that is how we'll get our hostages back. So thank you very much for bearing with me, and I just want to repeat the beginning point that we can see a change going on with our neighbors, whether it's Syria considering joining the Abraham Accords, or Lebanon fighting the Hezbollah and taking over the weapons from the Palestinian organizations, Jordan outlawing the Muslim Brotherhood. We can see the changes. And for that, all we can do is thank God and pray for more. So if you liked this, and if you like what we do here, please click like, subscribe, and as always, if you have a comment or a thought, then write it below and we'll respectfully engage on the subject. God bless you all, and shalom.